everybody, and welcome to another Coffee with Conrad. This is episode 13. See, Conrad, I counted them this week. And today we're going to be talking about shortfalls in IT documentation. This is something that we have spent a lot of time over the last couple of years working on with our team because really documentation does make the difference. How you doing this morning, Conrad?
I'm doing good. Doing very
So a
good.
lot of people listening right now, they don't work at Agile IT. They don't know how much you talk about documentation. Why don't we start by giving an idea of that?
Um, that we don't talk, or that I do talk a lot about documentation. I talk about a
Yeah,
lot of things.
it's it's almost all you talk about. If you're
It
talking
certainly
about
feels that
something
way
else, you're
sometimes.
talking about the documentation that needs to be done.
Well, there's a lot of times when, we do a lot of interesting projects for customers, and even when they get the results of what that is, there still needs to be a feeling of what we did. And sometimes it's because um, we may have deployed or configured or developed something for them, and now it's theirs. Go on about it, right? It's like you most people buy a car, they don't really look at the manual very often, but when you buy it, you kind of expect one to be in there. And at some point you actually end up using it. And if it wasn't there, you'd really have a big complaint. How could they give me this piece of machinery that has no instructions how to do anything? Like they must be forcing me to go to their service department. This is crazy. So IT, I feel, has a lot of those same type of hangups. Is in your environment. There is always a, uh, a desire to have good documentation, but there's a lot of I think that the shortfalls for the IT organization as a whole is there's the common thing of, well, I'll write it when I'm done. All right, I'll write it when I'm done. And the problem about writing it when you're done is you're never really done, right? You're never really done. There's always something else you have to do. As soon as you're done with something, you have to go back. And the other problem is we will tend to forget to what we did do. Like, look, I was just trying to get it to work. Made a batch of cookies, and they're the world's best. Like, oh, did I put one or two pinches of something in it? How much of that flour did I put in? God, I don't remember what it was. One of the things that years ago when I worked for another company focused on the science industry, and one of the things that I learned to really appreciate from them was when they're putting together a new drug, or you know, they're working on any formulations. They write every single step in the process, every single ingredient, every single result down, because if it works, well, you need to be able to recreate that magic. And you're like, what's that have to do with IT? Well, you might have deployed something, configured, got it to work. How did it work? Well, I think I did these 5 things, but they forget what was the order in the process, what, and also what didn't work. And I think that's another place where I think in when I talk about in IT, as I think as an overall industry, most organizations tend to undervalue documenting what doesn't work. And it's important because when somebody does look at it, like, oh, you did these things. Well, what else did you do? Well, here's the things we did that didn't work and why. And you go, oh, good. Well,
I,
then that makes sense.
I'd like
And
to
you,
unwind that a little bit
uh,
because quite a while ago, when Windows Virtual Desktop was still in private preview and you were
mhm.
doing work on it, there was one night where you worked all night on getting it all set up, and I was not on the leadership team yet. I was just in there, doing my little marketing manager thing, and you come in at like 7:30 in the morning, and you walk by my office and you go, Spicer, come to my office. I need to talk to you. Oh, great, I'm getting fired. Like, oh my God, like, why is the CEO calling me into his office? And you explained that you'd been up all night and you wanted to show me what you created. And you showed me your notes, and they were so complete, they were god awful. It was, well, that didn't work. Okay, we'll try this and this. Okay, that caused this exception. But I could see the entire process that you'd gone through over about 4 or 5 hours. And then when it was time for somebody else to roll it out next, you just gave them that documentation. They cleaned it up and worked from there. And it was great because by documenting your mistakes, you made sure that they didn't need to make your mistakes.
Yeah, no, yeah, thanks for calling that out. And that's it, and I feel like that's important. And but many people don't want to put it in there because they feel like mistakes are bad, right? Like, well, yeah, I'm supposed to be the IT genius and do it perfect the first time every time, and that's just BS, man. Like nobody that never works. I don't know where any that works anywhere in the world. You know, you play baseball, you hit over 300 in your career, you're going to the Hall of Fame, right? It means you failed 70% of the time, and you're still fantastic. IT is not that bad of the ratio, but it's you're going to run into problems, and the part of not documenting your failures just means that those failures can happen again and again with the organization, and it's a waste because you actually did it. So yes, write down the things that you do when you're doing it. And again, this is another place where it's like, well, why should I spend the time writing it down if it doesn't work? Well, again, like I've been up late night, and many years ago when I would work on something, and then later on I would say, oh man, did I try that? Did that work? Dang it, I got to do it again. And I learned my lesson. Like if I wrote it down, I would have known I did do that, and I did know the pattern of a combination. Like why they do these things. And then when I bring other people into the conversation because I need their help or Microsoft support, they're like, "What did you try?" If I have to start talking about it, I'm wasting time. If I could just give it to them to read, they can read so much faster. So that was a big thing. And on that same note, not just document as you go, not just write down every mistake and keep that mistake information in there somewhere. Always do it in a place where other people can see it. So what drives me crazy if people put things like, and you can experiment in OneNote, but when you're really doing actions, I'll talk about in a second, you really want to put it in a different form. But it drives me crazy when people put those valuable pieces of information that again, people hide it because they tend to be like, I don't want to show it until I actually can figure it out. It's poppycock. Don't do that. I mean, you if you put it in a place like in Teams or SharePoint, then other people can read it and see it and go, oh, you know what? Yeah, I think you're doing something, and to get some help, and putting it in the open from the very beginning makes you also think about proper formatting and everything else. And so I feel like that's really key. And it is such a simple concept, but it is a very different way of working and a very different kind of emotional connection that you have. Because I feel like a lot of times in IT, we want to squirrel it away and hide because sometimes it shows our weakness. There's something we're not good at. There's something we're struggling on, which is exactly the point. If you're having that, you have a struggle, other people can see and help. And so there's just so much good about putting in the open and doing it as you go. The other is when you're actually you've figured something out, did a lot of good documentation, kind of raw notes, and now you want to really make this as a template or as a guide or whatever that is. And we use a model where we do this, pair engineering documentation where you can have two engineers. You can have an engineer with a project manager. You could have an engineer with a tech writer. It works in all these ways. The reason why, like, well, why not just have the engineer do it? Like, aren't you doubling the cost? Well, by having the engineer who may have figured it out, but now they're going to put it in a really good format to make it reusable. Maybe you did in a lab, and now you're getting ready for production. Is it? It does a couple things. One is it slows the engineer down, and the second thing is having somebody else there push back on the engineer a little bit or ask questions. It helps that technical person think through like, oh, okay, maybe that wasn't that pace. And it also provides a lot of support to the engineer who both may feel like they're by themselves doing it. And sometimes they'll skip things or they'll forget things because they're going too fast. So having this, and I take this kind of model from pair programming. So if you're doing software development, you're doing pair programming, one person's writing the code, the other person is like looking at it, analyzing, just another set of eyes as you go. You don't have to do it all the time, but for these types of things, hey, we built something out in the lab, we're going to run it in production with hundreds of thousands of people in the business. It's important. It's a great investment for them to do it together, and I'll tell you, it comes out with great results every single time. Again, it's like, well, aren't I doubling the cost? No, you actually, I believe, save money because by putting the engineer by themselves, they will tend to miss things. They'll say, well, I'm going to be the person that's going to do it. In this model, the engineer who's figured out in the lab works with the non-engineer, somebody else that's going to write it, and they give it to a third person. They're the one that's going to go do it. Isn't it better just have the engineer do it by themselves? You could, but guess what? Guess what? You rarely get good documentation of what you do. So And it's so important. And by the way, once you get these results out, people tend to really feel great about what they put together, and it's really really great to see. The other one is what's a note versus a versus facts. So, yes, you can experiment in OneNote, try things there. I do it all the time, but when it's really time to make it really good documentation, like if we're working on a project with the customer, I tend to not want to put things into notes. I want to put things into more formal documents. We put it in Word. And then, what's the difference? Like if you're in a status call, like, well, we did a status call and we took a note. It's like, was that a note or a agreed upon decision? Because if it's an agreed upon decision or it's an action that we know we're going to go do, that is not a note. So I prefer that it not be in the notes. I prefer it be in the document. And so in the notes, you can say decisions were made. It is in the document. Perfect. Go over there and go do it, because I don't like data in two places, the same data in two places, because then it looks, well, which one was the real decision? So if we say, hey, all of our decisions are here in this document, here in the status note, just means we had a call, we were asking a question of this, made a decision, it's in the document. Then you go to the document. So there's always one view of the truth. And any issues we have in there, that's not a note, right? An issue is a real thing. Your activities are real things. What your order of operations of what you're going to do in what order is a real set of lists and things. That should be in a formal document. By formal, it doesn't mean that, oh goodness, are we doing large government regulated documents? No, it just means that our formal documentation, if you can put in PowerPoint, I used to do that long ago, whatever the agreed upon location, format, whatever, that's the formal place. Notes are like just writing things on sticky notes and sticking on your desk. That's not official. It's not real. It's just a quick thing. But real places where we decide or capture our decisions and issues needs to be in a place we all agreed upon. So I think that's a kind of a formal place. And lastly, here's the other place where, again, it's like, well, we're only deploying this domain, we have 5 domain controllers. We're going to put a 6th one in. So, it's not a big deal. I'll just build it. And why do I need to write stuff down? Because you never know when you're going to build the 7th or the 8th. Or 6 months from now, when you go, wait, what did we put on that server? Because it either died or we need to make another update. What did we do? And you want to look back. It's always the reason why you'll get angry with yourself. I love it. I try to praise, a previous Conrad. Right? Like, thanks, previous Conrad, from documenting that down, because I forget stuff, and it's what we all do. So it's great when you have that. And to me, screenshots are kind of a waste of time. It is, I feel, lazy, and it is extremely, extremely unreusable. If I built a domain controller one time and wrote down every setting name and every value, that first time sucks. It really does. But the second and third time, I copy paste, update the values, it is golden. So you take that initial investment in the beginning. Nobody likes to do an ab workout, watch their diet, to do whatever, but they love when they go the results when they go to the beach. It's no different here, right? Put your investment in. You know, if you just do screenshots, again, it's lazy. And guess what? You also can't do when you do screenshots. I'm sure somebody's going to tell me some technology that's gonna be better, but let's skip that part. You can't search for it. If I have this even in a OneNote, but mostly in a Word document or something, and it's stored away, and I do a team search for that particular field, I find all the documents or places that had that because I took the time to write it down. So now I can find it, I can reuse it. It just has all this goodness. So documentation doesn't have to be a pain, but it is so necessary. And I can't tell you how many organizations I go into that just have really, really poor documentation. And those organizations, I'd say 99 times out of 100 are the ones that have the worst looking infrastructure that you can imagine, which is great. You take them to the cloud, but now you're in the cloud, you still need to document those things down. So those that create a discipline of documentation, not to be, and I'm not talking paragraphs for you to re-explain. We don't do that. If there's something that Microsoft explains on what those fields are, we put a link to it. But the fields and the values that were implemented in the order for you, that absolutely should be written down. And you'll need that in the future or in the future. And it makes such a difference. And because people don't document as you go, every time we say, well, hey, what does your environment look like? What is your structure of your group policies? What is these? We ask all these questions. It takes people hours or days to go figure it out because they never document it down. They constantly will say the same thing. Well, after I'm done, then they'll go back and document, but they never do. So these are common practices that we use ourselves. So hopefully it's valuable for other people as they go through this. And again, I will tell you, people who get really good documentation, companies that have a practice around doing this, um, it makes all the difference in the world for customers. And I feel like as engineers, you just look like a superstar when this is just a natural part of what you go do. So anyway, so we thought we'd share that with everybody, and hopefully that helps.
Hey, we generated a lot of questions today, Conrad. The
Holy
first
goodness.
Yeah, the first one I think we answered. So this was a question on there must be a return on investment for documentation. Documentation could potentially reduce the pace of the project. And when you were talking about the pair engineering, I
Mhm.
think you covered that. But
Well,
in
but that one part when people say it slows them down, and I'll tell you, slowing down a lot of times in engineering is actually a really, really good thing because it tends for them to not do it. And plus, one thing that's interesting when you document, and by the way, this I'll tell you one thing I forgot to write in here. The person that clicks or writes is the one that's also puts the documentation in the pair program. The other person's given instructions like do that, write this. They're making the decisions. That's normally the senior person. And the one of the reasons you do that is like let's say there's a text box that's like computer name. It doesn't matter if you write it in the document first or in the field, but you should only write it once and then you copy and paste to the other side, right? Don't type it over here and then type it over there. Because what you can also find are typing mistakes, right? You put it over here, you put it over there. You can identify it either because one of them gives you a red squiggly. Maybe it's something that doesn't have like a real word for it, but you can identify it. We've seen that before. But like, oh, wait a minute, right here in the documentation, you misspelled it. Oh, dang it. That must mean I misspelled it in the other thing too. Yep. Oh, I know what it is. Even before looking everything up. So because you slow down before you take that time, you actually find out more problems as you're going and so that actually helps accelerate it. But it's a very common kind of point. But hopefully it helps.
yeah, then how is documentation different from a training manual?
Training manuals tend to be in I normally feel training manuals are a sanitized, explained step-by-step interaction. A lot of documentations will have, again, I just like to keep it simple. And so we'll have normally like there's an activity. So there's an activity name. I'm sorry, like there's a, like let's say we're deploy virtual machine in Azure, right? Then there's a sub bullet requirements. Well, one, we're going to need a subscription, blah, blah, blah. So we put those bullets, then then the bullet up, it'll be activities. And we actually have the step-by-step activities we're going to do with all of their values. Server name is this, IP is this, server type is this. We're not explaining why that's there. We're not explaining, the value of virtual machines. And training manuals tend to do this. This is just the cold hard facts. This is the server installed in this order with these properties. That's there. A month later, you say, what happened with that server? Oh, let me pull up the document. Oh, these are the resource groups and everything we put it in there. So I think it's, even though these things tend to be long, and it's just because they're bullets, but brevity is important. And so if it's just a cold hard facts, we did do that, we did install this, we did configure that. Training manuals tend to be an explanation and trying to guide you through it. So I feel like they're very different.
All right. Next question is, when estimating a new task, how much time should be budgeted for the documentation of it?
Hmm. It's a good question. Um, if you're, uh, I normally will budget sometimes for documentation, but normally it's for, prepping it or cleaning it. But I believe you have to put, the time of documentation along with it. It's like saying, well, when I do engineering work, how much time should I put in there for clicking and moving menus around? Well, that's ridiculous. That's part of the process. Well, so is documentation as part of your process. So if you do it all the time, it becomes just a part of what you do. So is it added documentation time? Well, it's really not because I'm doing it throughout. So normally, again, you'll normally find projects where like, oh, it's going to take 8 hours of engineering and 2 hours of documentation. Well, if you remove those 2 hours, but you documented everything you went, it probably still going to be about 8 hours. Maybe it's an extra hour. People put a lot of documentation time into it because one, they hate doing it, and two, they have to go back and refigure everything out. So it takes them a lot of time, and I actually feel like they spend not enough, they don't have enough time in it. And so then there's these shortfalls of it not being as complete. So if you document as you go, it just becomes part of that process. So I would only add in maybe another, you know, 5 to 10% of your overall time. It's a rule of thumb, but don't call it out separately. Just know that you're going to do it throughout.
Right. So I'm going to jump around a bit here because I think this is a little bit more complex question. What about as an engineer, when you need to go back on what you were doing and recreate using a different methodology, should you delete the notes you took to reduce confusion or keep the other ones for posterity?
You definitely don't delete anything. I think anything that you've created or documented, it is valuable information, even if it's like, you know what, guys, we wrote this document down and we're going to use ARM and we're going to do it this way and we put these properties in, but the result at the end is not what we wanted. You can either create a new version of the document. I've normally done things like where I create an appendix at the bottom and create other headers like other things I did, and so it's there. And then so somewhere in the future they go, oh, they did it this way. I wonder if they tried these other things. Oh, it's there in the appendix of other things I tried. Oh, okay. Oh, okay, they did that. All right. Well, cool. And that thing might have been a year ago. So I think you should always keep it because everything you do is valuable information, including we got what we wanted and we didn't like it, but now it's historically there. If not, people will ask about it, and and in 6 months or a year, they're going to do it all over again. Like, why'd you guys do that? We tried that. Well, we didn't know. So I would definitely always keep it.
Right. I also think that comes back to what you were saying earlier about working out in the open, is that it becomes searchable.
Mhm.
And so now what you've done, I mean, to delete something is to forget it, in that case.
Yep.
All right, last question here, and we are coming up at the top of the hour. So documentation needs to be shared and business knowledge protected. Is Teams the answer to do both?
I well, I really like Teams because it allows us to, Teams to me is just a great facilitator, right? Because Teams isn't Word, it's not Excel, but it facilitates all that, allows us to communicate, see it, tag people in, like, hey, I just ran into this problem. Here's the link to the document that's here. Can somebody take a look at it? Boom, they click up on their phone, they put another conversation. It just helps us get there. And I like that better than where, again, behind the scenes, it's still SharePoint, right? Behind the scenes, it's still Word, it's still these things, but it's just such a great facilitator for us to document, and it's there in our team, and we get the document. You can still put security rules on it, don't go crazy, but you can still do those sorts of things. And if you wanted to, when it's done, you can use Power Automate to PDF and store that sucker someplace if you wanted to, right? So there's great things inside of Teams and Microsoft 365 to enable that. But it is such a great place for us to work in the open with notes sometimes, because we're in a crazy laboratory that we put into a Word document because we're trying to really make this thing real. We tag each other in, we use our meetings, we go through our meeting notes. It really helps us do that whole process together, where before it was just a link in SharePoint and we'd be emailing people, Skyping each other, just so disconnected. Where now that whole conversation, the whole path to developing is totally captured as we went. That just makes it really nice and way easier to do this type of documentation, which obviously you could tell I'm excited about.
Absolutely. All right. Well, we're at the top of the hour now, and we are out of time. Conrad, thank you very much. For those of you watching online, give us a like and follow. If you have any questions, you can go ahead and ask those in the comment sections below. I generally try to get to those within a day or two. As YouTube continues to expand in terms of our viewership. If you're reading on the blog, you can go ahead and leave questions in the comment section below. And if you'd like to sign up to join our live audience, you can do so at agilit.co/CWC. Thanks for joining us. Have a great weekend.